Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our third session of GST Colloquium, 4 Dimensions of 4 Years Journey. So today we'll be covering third dimension, which is input tax credit, and which is the most important dimension of GST law. So the whole purpose of introduction of GST law was to avoid cascading effect of taxes, because under earlier laws we had set of taxes like entry tax, cesses, etc., which were not creditable. Then we had interpretational issues on the definitions of say input services. So with that background, GST law was supposed to allow full fungibility of taxes in the form of credits. So once we start reading the GST law input tax credit provisions, it allows credit on all goods or services used in the course of furtherance of business, which gives an impression that anything and everything below the sky is eligible for credit. But unfortunately, this joy is short-lived only, because as we progress, we come with a number of conditions, restrictions, etc., which reduces the scope of input tax credit, as well as creates a lot of hassles for compliances for even eligible input tax credit. So even in our inaugural session, we had detailed discussions that the transition of pre-GST credits were not smooth. There have been interpretation issues relating to transfer of credit of cesses. What will happen that if pre-GST taxes, say like due to non-fulfillment of export obligation, those are paid now, whether those will be available as credit apart from portal issues. Then as we come to GST, then we have a long list of ineligible goods and services under section 17(5). If place of supply is in a different state, credit is not available. We have multiple portal issues as well. So in today's session, we'll be discussing about the eligibility criteria, conditions for availing ITC, and the restrictions. And today also we have a set of diversified and distinguished panelists. So we have with us Mr. Shailendra Jindal, who is Associate Director Taxation in Goodyear, India. We have Mr. Pawan Agarwal, CFO, Swatch Group, India. We have Sandeep Bansal, Area Tax Manager, Corteva Agri Sciences, India. And we have Mr. Milind Saraf, Indirect Taxation Head, Andritz Hydro. So today I have my colleague Asmi Mangla, who will be moderating the session. So over to you, Asmi.
Yeah, thank you, Puneet, for setting the context for today's session. And good afternoon, everyone. So today's topic is input tax credit. To me, it is very exciting topic. I'll tell you how. So if we go to Amazon website or application to buy something, we get a option of offers in the below the any item you purchase. So when we click on the offers, it says some card offers, then EMI offers, and then there is one line written, get GST invoice and save up to 28%. Now Amazon have very smartly created this input tax credit as one of the offers on their website to tempt the customers. And they are simply telling people that, you can save up to 28% if you give the GST number. And not just Amazon, you go out and to buy anything, all the salesperson out there have become the tax consultants these days, and they tell you how you can give your GST number and you can save up to 28%. So my question here is it that simple? I mean, obviously the objective of government, as Puneet highlighted, was to remove cascading effect and seamless flow of credit. But as these people are highlighting that as a marketing gimmick or as a selling gimmick, that you can save up to 28%. So with that intent, we ran a poll and we asked public if eligibility of input tax credit is a solved answer or is it still a confusion among the minds. So if you see the results, almost 86% of people feel that it's still a lot of confusion even after 4 years, or it's still settling, and only these 14% people feel that it's mostly settled. Maybe these are those salespersons who feel that you can save 28% by just giving the GST number. So starting with the first condition, as Puneet said, we'll be discussing 3 elements. One is eligibility criteria. Second is the conditions for availing credit. And lastly, restrictions under GST to avail credit. Now, when we go through section 16.1, it is very simply written that all goods and services which are used or intended to be used in the course or furtherance of business, credit can be taken on them. Now, when I highlighted the example of Amazon, I did not tell one thing. So other than writing this thing, then that give GST number, you can save up to 28%. They have also written that save up to 28% on business purchases. Now they have smartly used this word business purchases, but have they realized what all struggles a taxpayer, a purchaser faces after purchasing that item to actually avail the credits? So all those struggles of satisfying section 16 and 17. So Mr. Pavan, I would like to ask you, like in this background, do you feel that is it that simple, or in these 4 years you had an experience of deciding on some of the expenses, that whether it is in the nature of business or not, like in your company while incurring many expenses, have you felt that this is not in the nature of business? So you're on mute.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I think there is still a lot of confusion as far as admissibility and claimability of ITC expenses are concerned. To my understanding, as long as any of the expenses are incurred, which is for the business promotion, business purposes, it should be allowed. So while there are a list of exclusions, which I still understand, but there are still a lot of ambiguity in terms of the expenses, and I'll give you an example, especially say in our case as well. We do incur a lot of expenses for our business promotion purposes, to give away the free of items for our trade purposes to our dealers, and there is still a lot of doubts whether those expenses are allowed or not, and we have seen a couple of advanced rulings, for example, Page Industries as well. So I think there is still a lot of doubt to my mind. As long as expenses are purely towards the business nature, all those expenses, ITC should be allowed on those expenses.
Yeah, right. So basically, if I talk about the individual, like if I go out to buy a washing machine or a AC for myself, and I am also a GST registered person, for me as a sole proprietor or as a professional, there might be a confusion that, if I'm purchasing a washing machine, it is for my personal use or business use. But for a company who's running a business, can we actually say that anything is for the personal use of a company, because it's a legal entity? All the expenses they are doing, they are for the business. So even if we spend amounts on our employees, like we sponsor their trips, we get them facilities of transportation. So all these things we are doing for the business. So Mr. Sandeep, I would like to know from you, should this question even exist for a company, that this question of eligibility in the course or furtherance of business? Why would a company do any expense which is non-business? So you're on mute.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So Hasmi, I fully agree with you. And at least for corporates, I don't think there is any iota of doubt that a particular expense is for business or not. So the request to the entire fraternity is that one needs to understand the concept of business. So yes, GST per se has specifically defined what business is. But in fact, if I were to look at even from a common sense perspective, or even from a jurisprudence coming from various laws, the term business is much wider than simply manufacturing or providing goods or services. So it is not only restricted to that. Business is much, much, much beyond that. So it is for modernization of the, I mean, business as such, to save my business rights, etc. That is also part and parcel of my business. So, and the employee motivation, it's my business. It is the company's real business to take care of its employees and to keep them motivated. As you rightly mentioned, there are multiple expenses which are incurred on their trips. And in fact, many a times the uh, employees travel, their hotel expenses are incurred. So there are still lot of ambiguity which keeps on creeping, whether the ITC on those things shall be available or not. I'll take a particular example, as you rightly touched upon, the uh, free trips, etc., for the employees. Or in fact, maybe my business requirement would have been, for example, I want certain employee who is joining my organization to travel from one state to the other, right? Now, when he travels to the state of his base location, or he joins the company, generally companies provided a rent-free accommodation for a period of 15 days and allowing him to stay there, look out for his house, etc. Now there have been AR rulings which have gone on to say that is not for business purpose. It is for the, since it is for personal consumption of the employees, hence GST on hotel credits, etc. should not be allowed. In my personal view, that is not for personal consumption at all. It was necessitated by my business. It was a condition of employment, in fact. I mean, it was my requirement as a business that I'm requesting somebody to travel from his state to come to this state and stay over here for a couple of days, find out his uh, house, or whether he wants to buy or rent, etc. Just settle it down. So it is in business interest to do that.
Right.
So
Right.
the fundamental is that business is simply not manufacturing of goods or providing services. One needs to understand it beyond that.
No, absolutely. I think you've summed up it so well. And I think the only problem is the adverse advance rulings that have been coming and denying credit on accommodation of employees, MDs, and employee facilities. So they are saying that these are in the nature of personal expense, as you highlighted. So Shailendraji, I would like to ask you, what are your thoughts on these adverse advance rulings that are coming up, and is it creating a confusion in the industry?
So my other panelists have rightly said, I mean, there's still a lot of confusion on the eligibility of input tax credit, because when we moved from the pre-GST era, pre-legislation, so we thought GST would be much simpler. Government will learn from the past experience of ambiguity and it will be much simpler. But still, there are a lot of ambiguity in terms of the provision, in terms of advance ruling, So basis my experiences and what I heard from others as well, to give some examples, one is definitely for the personal use of the employees, which should be a doubtful area, which should be available. Other area I would say, for example, the raw material. For example, during the COVID lockdown, so factories were shut, and some raw materials has the limited, shell life. So the raw material procured get unusable or the waste, So whether the input tax credit on the raw material which was purchased for the production but somehow could not be used because of the unprecedented circumstances, whether it's available or not, that's still a doubtful area, Another is the CSR activities, So whether it's the furtherance of the business or not, it is actually to me, because and that the ITC is available on the CSR activity or the input services we avail for providing CSR activity. That's again a big doubtful area. So there are a few instances, and there have been mixed advance ruling in some of the cases. So that's still a lot of confusion there, which could have been avoided by the government.
I think you have touched upon all the pain areas that we'll be going to discuss in this session. So, and over and above that, not just business test, if you've gone through a recent advance ruling in case of Aristo Bullion, They have in fact shaken the soul of GST by saying that whatever credits you are taking in one GSTIN, and if you're running two businesses under single GSTIN, so credits of one business cannot be used to pay liability of other business, even when you are in same GSTIN. So it has, completely defeated the purpose of GST regime, which was to allow credit as a common pool for the entire GSTIN. So with such advanced rulings, I think the confusion has risen to a next level. So Puneet, would you like to add on anything on this topic, like business test, how companies should deal with this condition and how should they satisfy this test?
Right. So, Asmi, yeah, first point, which Sandeep rightly mentioned, that we need to understand what is business. In my view, for a company, business should be understood from what is there in the memorandum or articles of association for what it was formed. And there is sufficient jurisprudence under income tax law also that whatever expenses incurred by a company, it's for the purpose of business only, including whatever these advanced rulings are saying, that suppose some employee has performed well and there is a trip which is sponsored, or stay expenses, guest house expenses, etc. Secondly, in my view, when the government drafted GST legislation, they always intended the scope to be very wide. That's why they have used the words like in the course or furtherance of business. So in the course or furtherance covers both horizontally and vertically, in the sense that what you need for regular running of business or whatever you need to expand the business, etc. And under income tax law also, if we see section 37, any expenses used wholly or exclusively for the purpose of business profession, which is a similar definition. Pre-2011 also, we used to have definition of input service activities relating to business. So all this jurisprudence, since time immemorial, has suggested that all expenses which a company is incurring, whatever example we take, be including CSR and all those things, those are for the purpose of business or profession only. But yes, it's unfortunate, I think, at both the levels. Firstly, the taxpayers go to advanced ruling authorities for straightforward issues and creating confusion for everyone. And secondly, even advanced ruling authorities taking a very, very microscopic view and not understanding the purpose of law and the statutory provisions.
Right. So before we move to next part, Milind sir, would you like to add anything on this issue? Like, do you feel this business test is a valid test that every company should follow, or? I think we have some.
Yeah, I think he has got disconnected. Maybe he will join and we can proceed. Yeah.
Sure. So as we discussed, I think we can see some examples on which this doubt comes. So all the facilities we extend to employees or the membership for our directors, employees that we take. So we always juggle with this question whether this is in the course of business or not. But as we have rightly concluded that for a company, everything is business and nothing is non-business. So this question or this doubt should not be there. But thanks to our advanced rulings, this question is still unsettled. Now, moving to next conditions. After satisfying this business test, we next have certain conditions that we need to satisfy to avail credit. We'll start with the condition which was introduced roughly about 1.5 years ago and has already been amended 3 times after that. So the condition says that we can take credit only of the invoices uploaded by the supplier in their GSTR1. So initially there was a buffer of 20%, then it was reduced to 10%, then 5%. And now as per proposed amendment in the Finance Act, it says that there would not be any buffer at all. So once this amendment is notified, we can only take credits which are appearing in GSTR1 of the supplier. Now, Shailendra ji, I would like to know from you, how do you see this proposed amendment? Will this create a problem, or industry has now settled with matching principle and you feel this is a good thing to timely avail credits? How do you see this condition?
first of all, before I answer that, the matching the credit itself a voluminous, too much of manual task, because the government should come up with the better way of reconciliation, some better logics using the robot or artificial intelligence. Maybe they come up with the GSTR2, which will, some way automate, but it's a lot of manual work, especially for a companies having a multiple registration across the country. For example, we are a consumer product. We have about 30 registrations. So it's a mammoth task, right? And then coming with not giving a buffer is definitely not a welcome move, because 2 reasons. One is there are multiple, service provider or supplier of the goods who are into different scheme. Some are into the composition scheme. So they have the different time period of filing their returns. So, and we have already accounted for the purchase in our books. So that will remain mismatch. Another is the time lag. The reconciliation process itself is a lengthy process. So there are the differences. We have to follow up with the vendors, get it corrected, So there has to be some buffer. I would feel 5 to 10% buffer should be there. Unless the government, come out with a better process of reconciliation and maybe come up with the GSTR2. So that is not a welcome proposal from an industry perspective, because that will get our cash, blocked unnecessarily, especially in this unprecedented COVID times where we are already facing the cash flow, issues.
I think all viewers would agree with your point that, buffer should be there, because otherwise all minor mismatches, you have to justify everything, and there would be a lot of cash outflow. So, Milind sir, I would like to know from you, like we know that department is issuing random notices on mismatches between our credit and GSTR 2A. So they are giving an amount and asking you to reverse the ITC. So how is industry's experience in dealing with these notices or summons from department? So you are on mute.
Hello.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. So actually, we are experiencing a trouble of it. We have already got the notices on this issue. And as my other colleagues have said, it is really a very troublous task that there is a challenges in the reconciliations. If we are operating through multiple locations, and even though to control all these vendors and becoming responsible for that they have reported their returns or not, it's really I don't think it's a justice to us. So when we are getting the notices, again, it is going very difficult to explain to the authorities. We are to provide reconciliation through the documentations only by giving the simple submission. Cluster of so many things, so many data that it may be of an older period, maybe of new period, something they have reported, something not reported. There may be a multiple permutation combinations. So to reply such queries only through a document, it really in that case, if they have not agreed to that and they have not accepted our this submissions and they block the credit, then it will be really I think they should be addressed by the government, and they should find out some way out. And maybe they should either come with some mechanism that some mechanism should come to place actually, or these things could be justified only at the time of audit at least. But with such notices only we cannot justify actually the reconciliations. So that will be a problem to the industry.
Right. So I think one of the issue is that it is a big manual exercise. There is no automation as of now, and a lot of manual exercise is there. And secondly, that the differences these notices are highlighting, they are not backed with any reasoning. So it's very difficult to satisfy the differences to that extent, right? So I think this condition is there, and people are still struggling, and industry is still settling to with the 5% buffer now when the amendment will come and there would not be buffer. So another issues would be there. Yeah, you can hear us, sir?
So I'm getting some disturbances actually. Is this fine for everybody or only I'm getting disturbances?
No, your voice
Hello?
is not clear, Milind. Actually cracking in between. So, yeah.
I don't know. Actually, I'm also getting the cracked sound when Asmi is speaking.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Maybe you can rejoin.
Let me check. Let it
Yeah,
continue. Let me check.
Sure.
Okay. I try that.
And ask me on this topic. One is that these notices, we have seen that even for large companies, these discrepancy notices are leading even to suspension of registrations, because the government has automated system. If between 2A, 3B variance is more than this much, then straight away issue notices for suspension. So it's actually going to another level. Second related question I want to ask Shailendra and other panelists is that, like in our inaugural session, Mr. Didi Goyal also suggested that we should have some sort of 26 AS type system so that the credit is available. And he was actually agreeable to the point that buffer is not needed, but you simplify the system. And under income tax, this 26 AS is there for right now for long, and there's no buffer at all. So to that extent, why does industry need buffer then?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. But buffer is needed. I mean, as I mentioned, the buffer is needed to genuinely avail the credit, which is genuinely available to us. It's just the procedural basis and the government machinery system, which is not up to the mark or the perfect. So because of that, we are losing the credit and unnecessarily the cash is getting blocked, right? So it is the time-consuming exercises and the different, schemes available, different period of filing by the different, service providers, supply other goods,
Mm-hmm.
So they have to rectify that. That's to be. It's just
Very
procedure administrative thing which cannot be.
Right.
I think we can, to add to this, we can move to our next condition, which is also related one. So not just the matching what GST law requires, it also requires the recipient to ensure that supplier has paid the tax to government. So matching is one thing which, it's a big manual exercise, but that can be possibly done. But how will a recipient ensure that supplier has made payment of tax to the government? Now, this is another pain area for all the recipients and all the purchasers as to how do they satisfy this condition to avail credits. So Sandeep ji, I would ask you that what safeguards is industry taking? This condition has been there since beginning, that you have to ensure payment of tax by the supplier. So has industry reached out to some measures or safeguards to ensure this condition?
Well, thank you, Asmi, for this question. So honestly, the safeguards which the industry is taking are more for their own intellectual satisfaction. So whether they will help you in mitigating or discouraging the non-compliances, I am not very sure of that. And again, one needs to, as I mentioned in the beginning also, business is run all together on a different footing, right? It's not that the tax function is running the business. Tax function is just a part of business. You have sourcing team, they will have their own challenges. You have your business team, they will have their own challenges. So yes, as a safeguard, we have kind of incorporated several text-type, so-called text-type clauses in the agreements that if any loss is borne by the company or suffered by the company because of the non-compliance of the vendor, then the vendor will make us good that loss. But again, as I mentioned, it is for just intellectual satisfaction that these have been incorporated. The real ground reality is altogether different. Nobody is going to run after vendors for, small amounts, or in fact, maybe lack here and there. I mean, look at the multiplicity of legal proceedings which it will entail. And all these provisions which you just mentioned, that payment should be made by the vendor before recipient can take the credit or matching concept of 5%, etc. My question to government, in fact, is whether the time and amount we as corporates spending on this, is it for furtherance of business? To me, it is not furtherance, for they're not allowing us to do business. I mean, this has become, for corporates, this has become one of the major businesses. This reconciliation, a tax team running after sourcing team, then running after vendors, then vendor giving. I mean, it's a never ending exercise which has happened. And in my opinion, rightfully, there have been certain, the constitutional validity of this Rule 36.4 or Section 16.2C has rightly been raked up by the high courts, and it is pending, and it would be good to see what view the courts take on this aspect. So all these things that payment should be made is something not new really to the GST. It has been there I mean, there have been judicial precedents under VAT laws, quite a few under VAT laws. There have been Delhi High Court ruling in the case of Arise Industries. So the obligation, to my belief, obligation should not be put on the recipient. I mean, you have the mechanics, you have the mechanism to catch hold of the vendors. You gave them the valid GST registrations. There are, I mean, whatever as a businessman I could do, I have done that. I have ensured that the vendor is duly registered under GST. I have done that. Whether he has given a valid tax invoice, I have taken due care of that. But if somebody is not fulfilling his obligations or duties, why am I as a businessman looked upon in bad impression? And in fact, there is a rule 86A which can go on, gives the power to the officer to block my GST credits. I mean, to me, it is totally nonsense, and it's not, certainly not for furtherance of business, I would say.
I think, of course, all these conditions have been challenged before high courts for their constitutional validity. And in the coming times, we will see a good amount of litigation on these conditions. And in fact, in a recent high court judgment in the case of DY Beethel, the court has quashed the order of recovery from recipient on the ground that they did not make inquiry from the supplier. So, Pawan sir, what is your thought on this judgment? This has provided some sort of relief to the taxpayers that they can take this condition leniently, or this is not of much help?
I think even after the judgment, there will still be doubts regarding the admissibility. So it really won't help, and I think I fully agree with Mr. Sandeep Bansal, what he was saying, and I fully endorse his views. Maybe apart from the other safeguard measures, which, the companies can do is, apart from, putting these clauses into the vendor agreement, supplier agreements of indemnification and all, maybe as a process or SOP before appointing any new supplier or appointing a supplier, maybe some sort of a KYC should be done, so that, it gives you sufficient amount of bona fide intention and belief that whatever supplier you're onboarding is genuine and fulfilling its duties. Now, a lot of the informations are available in the public domain, whether from the Ministry of Company Affairs or Income Tax Portal or GSTN portal. You can get a lot of the information. So I think apart from that, these caveats should be done by all the corporates. But that being said, if you have a valid tax invoice, whether or not he has really paid the tax, supplier has paid the tax, person who's availing the ITC should never be penalized. I mean, it's irrational.
Right. I think yes. And to both of your points on keeping a tax clauses in the agreement, so there is another condition we will come on that creates another problem for us. But to that extent, yes, this condition of payment of tax, as pointed out by sir, that it is all to the satisfaction of our minds, and there is no foolproof mechanism by which we can actually ensure that this suppliers have paid the tax. And recently, in case of Balco Industries as well, they have followed, the High Court has followed the order of DY Beethel, and they have stayed the orders of recovery. that were raised on the basis of mismatch between 3B and 2A. And I was also reading that PhD Chamber has reached out to GST Council to remove this condition and to allow credit even if supplier is not paying tax. So we can definitely expect some relief to that extent if GST Council takes up this suggestion of PhD Chamber. So let's see how this turns up. With this, we'll move to our next and last condition for availing credits. So as you highlighted that we keep a tax clause in the agreements that if supplier is not paying tax, we'll hold some money, we'll retain some payment. So to that, we have another condition that if we are not paying to our supplier within 180 days, then again, we have to reverse the credit. So this condition is there to ensure that supplier is paying tax, recipient is paying tax to the supplier. And in case of, especially in case of works contract industries, Milind sir, you would be knowing that there are so many cases when we have deferred payments. Like there are performance guarantee clauses and the payment is deferred for months and years. And this 180 days clause is not being complied with. So what's your thought on this condition and how is works contract industry tackling with this condition of ensuring payment within 180 days? So you're on mute.
As you have said, in our industries, this is a general nature that there are the stage payments, there are milestone payments. In that case, payments do not go in a single go. So to monitor such payments, maintain its records, and to take the credit in that ratio is really a big challenge. So maintaining records of all that things are really creating challenges for us.
Correct, correct. So Shailendra ji, do you think that this, when they say that this condition says that if the recipient fails to pay to the supplier in 180 days, then he has to reverse the credit. So in such cases, like in works contract industry or where we have a tax clause in the agreements that if tax is not paid by the supplier, then we will hold payment. So both supplier and recipient are actually contractually agreeing that payment would be made after 180 days. So in that case, can we really say it is a sort of failure for the recipient to pay to the supplier?
So, you know, the law says there is a failure to make the payment within 180 days, then the ITC should be reversed, right?
Correct,
but
correct.
in the case of contracts where there's a performance, there's a withholding on account of the performance and all. So it's a prior mutual agreement, right? And it's a deferred payment plan which is mutually agreed upfront. So technically, it's not a failure. Then technically, and as per the law, ITC is not required to be reversed, you know, in such cases, because it's not a failure. It's a pre-agreed arrangement and not a failure. And we do have some works contract and all, and we do not reverse. You know.
So I think you have taken this call, but many of our viewers are still struggling if department would spare them if they take this interpretation that where contractual agreement has been done, then this condition need not be followed. So Puneet, would you like to add something on this?
Yeah, so ask me a couple of points. One, I feel that one, this is a GST legislation. This is not like a MSME regulation that you pay to supplier within 90 days, etc. So in my view, this condition is totally unwarranted under GST law. If we go to the history, why this condition was introduced, this was initially introduced for input services only. And why it was when it was introduced, service tax was payable on a receipt basis. It was not on invoicing basis. So the government wanted to cover both the legs, that when you pay to your supplier, then only he will deposit the tax, and then only you should get the credit. At that time, it made sense also, but post 2011 also, once point of taxation or accrual based taxation came, this was totally unwarranted. Secondly, in my view, this failure to pay needs to be considered that what I was contractually obliged to do. So if there was a performance guarantee, etc., due to which say 5%, 10% has to be paid after 2 years, or suppose the credit period itself is higher, etc., it should not be considered as failure. And then there are legal lacunas also that the machinery and recovery provisions are lacking. So in my view, both from macro and legal perspective, no reversals are needed in this case.
Right. I think that is why all these conditions have been challenged before many high courts, all these section 16(2) conditions, because they lack reasonability. So I think we can wait for the times to high courts and Supreme Courts to decide on these conditions. Now, coming to the next and last topic of our today's discussion, that is the restrictions that Section 17(5) imposes. So this is a handful list of barred credits wherein you cannot take credit at all. There is no condition, but you cannot take credit at all. So one of the major chunk of any company's expenses is the construction, the setting up expenses of their office building, their factory building. So there have been multiple advanced rulings as well, whether credit would be available on the construction or not. And we have rulings wherein they say that if because there is a exception to this clause, that if anything that you're setting up qualifies as plant and machinery, then credit would be available. Now we always enter into a single contract. The entire construction of a building is given to a contractor, and he raises single invoices for all the milestones. So Pawan sir, I would like to know from you that is industry able to filter out the expenses from that construction contract, that okay, these are plant and machineries and we can take credit, and these are the civil structures we cannot take credit. Is the position settled on this issue, or we are still missing out on credits?
No, I think again this is also one of the debatable issue wherein seamless flow of credits is still a big challenge here. As long as if we go back to the basic premise of ITC credit and the rationale behind it, as long as the expenses are in the course of the business, all those expenses should be allowed. I mean, whether the expenses are for revenue in nature or capital goods in nature, all expenses should be allowed. You inside the plant, you have a tube well, you are drawing a water from them, for your business purposes. Now even tube well should be allowed. Now it is an immovable property, but as long as it is serving the business purposes, it should be allowed. So again, it's a big debatable issue. The other debatable issue in this such case is, how do you really define the block of assets? So ideally there should be some synchronization of how do you really bifurcate into different block of assets. And we have block of assets as per the Companies Act, where for corporates we can always refer to the block of assets as per the Income Tax Act. So I think we can take the block of assets as per them, basis that whatever you are capitalizing, and whichever way, whether it's a civil structure or it's a plant and machinery, is it tool, is it movable, it's non-movable, credit should be allowed. But yes, as you have said, the litigation continues. Even in this case, there are a lot of rulings, advanced ruling, which is bad in law. So I think this should be addressed too.
Yeah. So as per your suggestion, government should come up with some clear lists, clear block of assets. Absolutely. That you can take credit on these items, and you cannot take. This cannot be so vague that except plant and machinery.
Yeah, I think just like
for a business.
Just like you have an exclusion list, maybe a couple of assets which you think those are exclusion, that could be just mentioned in the exclusion list, and the rest everything gets allowed, rather than looking at merit of the case for each and every expense, whether this should be a part of it or not part of it. They should be as crystal clear.
Right. And as you pointed out, that there is also confusion regarding movable asset or immovable asset. So we have rulings like WeWork India, which says that which allows credit on wooden flooring, glass partitions. So Shailendra ji, what's your thought on such rulings? Are they creating confusion, or they are helping us to take credits on these construction?
I'm not too familiar with the ruling, but I think they're creating confusion. But having said that, my take is, like any organization who spend on the civil work, right? Whether it's for the administrative building or shed for the machinery, it is again for the overall business of the business, right? I mean, the business cannot run without the administrative building or the shed over the machinery and all. And the law itself says for the furtherance of the business. If the business cannot run without those structures, then again, that ITC should be available. I mean, and so, I mean, that's my take is, and if there has to be some bifurcation, then the government should come out with the clear exclusion list, which is without any ambiguity. And then advanced ruling has to be, very clear. I mean, because we see sometimes, the contradictory advanced ruling as well. I mean, some jurisdiction come with some outcome, some jurisdiction. I mean, so there has to, sometimes we see the contradicted advanced ruling also. So I think there has to be better machinery around it.
I think taxpayers, in an attempt to settle the position for themselves, they are unsettling the positions for all others.
The taxpayer, the corporates are willing to, comply all rules and regulation, but it has to be simplified, and that's what the expectation was from the GST when so many, taxes were subsumed in GST.
And ask me just to add to what Shailendra and Pawan are saying, that I think there are two different aspects of this. One, if you ask about the constitutional validity, whether this restriction is valid or not, in my view, the challenge to the validity is incorrect, because it is government's discretion on which to allow credit or not. Secondly, if you ask from purpose perspective or logic perspective, it totally defeats the purpose that if the factory in which I'm producing the goods, or if the office from which I'm providing the services, if I'm constructing that, why credit should not be allowed? And Pawan raised a very valid point also, that yes, there is an exclusion for plant and machinery, and legally based on the provisions as well as rulings also, we can bifurcate whatever qualifies as plant and machinery electrical fittings, but it will raise an accounting issue also, because if everything is getting capitalized under land and building, so the GST authorities will take that as a point also, that here you are saying that it's a plant and machinery, but in books you're capitalizing as a land and building. So even though that's totally irrelevant point from GST credit perspective, yeah, but it adds one more layer of confusion. So I think the government should remove this restriction at all. And again, we go to the earlier point only, that if I'm spending money on any construction of immovable property, that's for the purpose of business only.
And in fact, in pre-GST regime, there was a clear list of services, like if you're taking works contract services or construction services, only that credit would be barred. Now, this condition has been made so vague that you're not even aware that what all expenses would directly relate to construction or indirectly. Even if we are taking the consultancy services who are, evaluating our books of accounts, and who are also checking on our construction expenses. And so there comes a doubt, even can we say that consultancy services or audit services, even that relates to the construction expense if they are taken when construction is going on. So to that extent, pre-GST regime was much settled in respect of this restriction, and now this is much unsettled now, this condition or this restriction, I would say. So yeah, so let's see how this turns up constitutional validity, if that gets settled, or there comes a certain list as to whether we can take credit on electrical fittings, sewage treatment plants, etc. Now moving to next debatable condition, we have restriction. So the law says that credit would not be allowed on goods disposed of as free gifts. Now, what is a gift? There are multiple schemes that we run in our business. We have one-on-one offers, 1+1 offers. We distribute goods in our marketing events, and we also run schemes like if a dealer or a distributor purchases certain amount of quantity of goods, then he'll be given gold points, or he'll be given extra goods that he has purchased. So Sandeep ji, what's your thought on this restriction, that can business actually give something free of cost? Like can business actually give a gift to people, and this condition should this restriction should apply to certain scenarios, or anything that is given free of cost, credit should be reversed on that? what are the business scenarios, and how do we take this condition?
Sandeep,
you
you're
are
on
on
mute. Yeah.
Sorry. So there can be multiple frills, I would say frills attached to it. When I say, so again, the primary question is business. Am I giving these, whatever I am giving, so-called gift, etc.? It is for business. Nothing is free in this world, right? I mean, if you will see from a pricing mechanism, all these things which I may be giving free of cost, but it inherently gets built into my cost of production or cost of goods sold, and I am recovering it from my customers. So it is inbuilt. So per se, from that point of view, business point of view, I would say that nothing is free. Now coming to the definition of gift in itself, now, I don't think there are enough jurisprudence in the, I mean, GST is fairly a new law, but how gift is defined is anything which is a voluntary thing. It has to be voluntary. And the person receiving or giving should not be receiving anything in return. Now, though at the time of giving the a particular article or thing, it may be seen that I'm not giving any monetary consideration, but there is a non-monetary consideration which I am getting, which a business is getting. Whatever I am giving to somebody, that I am saying that this is for my, as a marketing thing. That person to whom I am giving, that will act as a, I mean, though I may be using a strong term, but it would act as a brand ambassador for my gift. For as simple as if I give a, for example, a cap to my farmers, friends, etc., fraternity, bearing a Corteva logo. I might have given them to free of cost, but when he is wearing it, when he is going around, the people are asking about this Corteva brand. So he is in a way popularizing my brand. So I would not consider such things as per se to be gift per se. So if something is gift, then perhaps at the first instant itself, it becomes for non-furtherance of business. Once a thing is for furtherance of business, then it loses its sanctity, whether cannot be any question whether it is gift or not. So the first check needs to be whether it is for furtherance of business or not. And if it is for furtherance of business, then the question of at least the gift completely goes off to my understanding. That is my apparent view on this thing. Maybe other panelists can add to it.
Puneet, I think all our panelists want section 17.5 to be completely removed from the law. You say that everything is in the nature of business, so everything should be allowed.
No, but the point which Sandeep made are valid only that I think these schemes can be of two types. It can be, say, for example, Swatch is selling watches to a retailer. It says that if you buy 10 of these watches, I'll give you 11 in the price of 10. Another can be a retail thing only, that if a retailer sells a watch, you get a strap free or say a battery free, etc. So as far as the seller is concerned, it will always factor in the cost of that free item in the sale price of the goods. Secondly, even the definition of gift, which Sandeep rightly put, that it should be voluntary. But if, say, a seller is announcing the scheme to its customers, that, okay, if you buy this thing from me, I will give you this quantity free or this quantity extra, then no more it remains a voluntary. So in my example, if I'm a retailer and I have bought 10 watches and this scheme was in vogue, then I can sue Swatch that you are contractually obliged to give one watch. So the voluntary element totally goes. So I fully agree that yes, it's a business expenditure. It's a contractual obligation only. So there is no question of treating this as.
Right. And with the contractual obligation, there comes another expense that we have CSR expenses. And in COVID times, we have been incurring so much of CSR expense. Now, there are thoughts that, or there are views that even CSR expenses, whatever you are distributing goods under CSR activity, they also qualify as free gifts. So, Milind sir, what is your thought? Is CSR expense a free gift for a company? Or since there is a statutory obligation that exists under company's law, So it should not qualify as a gift. I think we have some trouble.
Milind, you are able to hear us? Hello. I think he
some network
messaged also. I think you can choose another panelist.
Yeah. So Shailendra sir, how would you say on this CSR expenses? How is industry settling up with this?
So CSR, the input tax credit on the CSR is definitely a doubtful area. But the CSR expense, I would say it is, it's relating to the furtherance of the business because, and if you look at the overall objective of the CSR, if we get the input tax credit, then the GST doesn't become the cost, right? The company have the limited bucket to spend, right? So the company can spend more also, which will help in the more of social responsibility, promotion and development of the economic growth of the country, right? And then CSR itself, when you're doing a CSR activity, then it helps boost the sales of the organization also. It helps in the sales promotion as well. So it is definitely related to the furtherance of the business linked to. So ITC should be available. Plus ITC is available. It creates more room for the company to spend more on that social cause. So those are the two, I would say points to where supporting the ITC should be available. But it's a doubtful area of it as of now.
So Pawan sir, we have a recent ruling of Dwarikesh Sugar, wherein they have discussed CSR expenses credit eligibility in detail, and they have said that if that is a statutory obligation under company's law, so that cannot qualify as gift and credit should be eligible. So has that helped the industry in taking credits on CSR expenses? Because in the beginning there was a lot of resistance by the industry to take credit on CSR expenses.
I think this judgment certainly will help erase some of the doubts because as long as per the Companies Act, it's a statutory obligation and companies are fulfilling that responsibility. It certainly gives a lot of confidence among the industry players to claim ITC on that. So this certainly helps.
One of the rare rulings wherein they are helping industry in taking the right position.
Yeah, in fact, yes. Just to add to what Mr. Pawan and Shailendra ji has mentioned, and you mentioned about the Dwarkesh ruling. See, my view is that one needs to read the law first. Then because case laws comes as a result of law. So you need to first read the law. And if we go by the case law, then it's like putting the bullock before the cart. Now, when we talk about CSR as an expense, see, what are the conditions which, for example, if I say as small as if I were to eventually donate certain thing, now when I purchase, say, books, I want to donate, say, 1,000 books to somebody. Now, when I purchase the books, I got a credit of that. Now, first test which it needs to pass is section 16(1)(16), that whether it is for furtherance of business. Now, the books I am going to donate so this is for furtherance of business in the sense, as you mentioned, that there is a requirement under Companies Act law, right? So I'm abiding by that. I need to fulfill that, and hence I am doing it. And as Shailendra ji also put it, will help create
social cause.
Social cause, and behind it will, help promote my brand of my company as such. So those furtherance of business kind of thing is definitely met by this section 16. Now then comes section 17. Now in section 17, then there has to be, again, there can be a debate about section 17 too, which says that this act of giving the books, in my example, whether it will constitute a supply or not. If my memory serves me well, Dwarkesh Sugar Mills didn't delve upon this aspect, section 17.2. They went on to justify that why it is not a free gift, etc. for section 17.5, but that section 17.2, that also perhaps if they would have gone into that, that would have given a further strength to the case or had helped lay down the correct proposition of law. And CSR, again, I have been speaking business. So business today is not purely, I mean, yes, profit making is one of the objectives of the businesses, but as we are growing, businesses are becoming more socially responsible also. Now, at one point, I mean, in one case, government is asking me under Companies Act, if I can use the word at gunpoint, that you make for corporate social, you have to incur expenses for corporate social responsibility. Now you contribute, but at the same time, they are not allowing us GST credit on that. And under the Income Tax Act also, they are disallowing that expense. So, okay, I mean, we as a businessman are fine doing these activities. We are willing to contribute, but where is the government's contribution in that? I mean, they are asking us to contribute. If they can, as a part of their contribution, can't they accept that, okay, GST credit will be allowed on this, or correspondingly income tax benefit should also be allowed to them? And to what Mr. Pawan and Mr. Shailendra also mentioned, if all these things are allowed, then perhaps corporates can go or much beyond the limits which have already been defined. Right.
So
And
in fact,
today,
yeah, please.
no, in fact, one question which perhaps I believe has been left unanswered, maybe by the Dwarkesh Sugar Mill case, is if a company is incurring expenditure beyond the limit which has been prescribed under Companies Act, whether still corresponding GST credit will be allowed to me or not. That
I was
is
coming to that only actually. So pre-GST regime, we have judgments wherein they have allowed the credit beyond that 2% limit also, stating that companies are doing a social cause and the intention is to serve the society. So to that extent, they should be encouraged and credit should be allowed.
definitely.
So,
I mean,
yes. Yeah.
So couple
Valid
of
point,
points. Yeah, so couple of points. One, Sandeep, you raised a valid point. Then once it is beyond the limit, what will happen? So in our view, even if we read the company law as well, when it mandates spending on CSR, it says 2% or more. So even as per company law, whatever you're spending, either 2% or more than that, everything is a statutory requirement only. The second, the income tax aspect, which you touched upon, is also equally relevant. So prior to 2015-16, CSR expenditure was allowed as an expense. And thereafter, they brought this restriction. So pre-2015-16, there is ample jurisprudence under income tax law. So like there was a company in a backward area who set up some school, roads, etc. in nearby village. They said it is for the purpose of business only and allowed deduction. So legally speaking, yes, income tax law has brought that restriction, but GST law till now doesn't have a specific restriction like this. So it should qualify as in the course of furtherance of business. The last point which I want to take, which Mr. Didi Goel, who was there in inaugural session also, he has put in a chat, is that the companies cannot say that this is resulting in brand building or advertisement. Otherwise, it will not qualify as CSR in the Companies Act itself. So frankly, I was not aware of this restriction. I think it may be coming from Companies Act only. So I think this is also one of the valid point which we need to note.
no, true, Puneet. So when I say that it promotes the brand as such, I mean, I'm not saying that they will be doing a marketing kind of thing.
Right.
But yet,
right.
definitely it creates an image.
Right.
Among that, yes, the company or these are, I mean, particular set of people who are from this company who are helping us in this thing. So company as through individuals are looked upon highly. Right. So that the company is doing all these activities, maybe the products which they are perhaps selling. So it kind of creates a soft thing in the minds of the people.
Right. Very true.
So as we have discussed all the conditions, restrictions, business tests, we can see that how the seamless flow of credit has been restricted by so many provisions, and the ultimate objective with which the government brought this GST regime that they want to remove the cascading effect and they want to achieve this seamless flow of credit. So that has still not been achieved. So we ran a poll also, and whether this GST law achieved its objective of seamless flow of credit. So if you see, 48% people say definitely not. 49%, however, feel that somewhat it has achieved. And I think in our inaugural session also, we discussed that to some extent, when they have clubbed all the taxes, they have allowed credit of all state taxes and central taxes to a taxpayer. So yes, somewhat we have achieved the objective, but all these conditions, these restrictions, and all the amendments that law is proposing, they're still restraining us from achieving the overall objective. So now, as a last part from all our esteemed panelists, I would like to have one suggestion for the government or for the viewers who are seeing, that what is that one thing you feel that should come through the government as a clarity, which helps in elevating this seamless flow of credit. So we can start from you, Shailendra sir.
So first,
one suggestion. Yeah.
First suggestion is, see, everything relating to business should be allowable. I mean, whether it's related to construction or the.
We missed your voice, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So I'm saying, first suggestion is, everything related to the business, and that should be allowable, whether it's construction of the building or factory shed, etc. Even for the personal consumption of the employees, because the organization doesn't run without the people, right? People are the major plant and machinery of any organization. So that's one suggestion for the government to consider. Second, with respect to the matching of the input tax credit, so recently, government under the income tax act, government come with the withholding tax on the payment toward the purchase of goods. Earlier it was purchase of services, procurement of services. And the government also come with a new requirement if the vendor or the supplier have not filed their returns for the last 2 years, then the TDS rate will become higher. So that's a challenge, how the recipient of the goods will verify whether their supplier have filed the returns, for the last 2 years. And when the big organization dealing with thousands, and the government do have that intelligence, if you punch in the PAN of the supplier, so it throws whether it has filed the return. So it comes with a few seconds or few minutes. It's come with that data. So similarly, under GST, government come with a utility, whatever the conditions are required, whether it's filed the GST 1 or not, 3B or not, whether he has paid the taxes or not. So that government can bring that, the utility with their intelligence and data they have, So that's two suggestions. Thank you.
Yeah, I think having a robust GST network wherein everything is automated is one of the wish list we all have. Yeah. Pawan sir, what is your one suggestion or one wish list, I would say?
So I think I will second what Mr. Jindal said. As long as the expenses are sitting in companies' P&L and they are for the furtherance of business, all such expenses definitely should be allowed. And maybe the other point is that a lot of litigation it gets created because of perhaps incorrect advance rulings. Maybe there should be some mechanism of a central advance ruling system wherein, rather than each state pronouncing contradictory opinion against the other state advance ruling, which also creates a lot of confusion and litigation, there should be just one body who decides on these matters. I think that may be a welcome step which can get rid of a lot of confusions among the industry players.
I think the advanced ruling problem we have been discussing since day one in this event, that adverse advanced rulings and contrary advanced rulings in different states is creating a problem. So there should be one single body giving rulings to all the taxpayers. Milind sir, if we can connect with you and your network is fine. So do you have any suggestion for the government?
Yes, I also agree with Mr. Pawar and Mr. Shailendra. This is the major point, that for the seamless flow of that ITC, And another is the major purpose is the price control. So for all this purpose, the whatever is hitting to the books of accounts in expenses, that should be allowed as a credit to the company, to the SSE. And secondly, even though the definition in the compared to B regime is very exhaustive for allowing the credit, but still the recent AR which are coming, which are asking for nexus in input and output and all these things are creating confusion and fear among the SSEs. So government should come forward to settle it earliest, so that any future business plan or all that things could be planned accordingly without any hesitations and fear.
Yeah, I think one way is that whatever is allowed under income tax to be deducted from the income as an expense. I think one simple way is that allow credit of all those expenses, because income tax law is settled now in that respect. So they can simply adopt that mechanism. I think that would be more easy and fair for the taxpayers.
Yes, yes.
Lastly, from you, Sandeep ji, what do you feel? What government should
No,
bring?
most of the, thank you. Most of the points have already been covered. So one suggestion, not to the government, maybe to the viewers, I said, don't go to advanced ruling as of now. Go to tax experts. I mean, going to the advanced ruling is creating, we have, as you rightly mentioned, from day one, we have been hearing a whole lot of criticism about the manner in which these advanced rulings are coming. So for corporates as such, it should be a thought through decision as to what are we going to achieve when we approach the AR ruling. So whether we should be approaching AR for clarity or whether we should be approaching experts like Nitya to get the clarity. Because once you go to the advanced ruling and more often than not, things go against you, then you are in a suit, whether to avail this credit or not, because it is binding on you. It becomes binding on you. And you continue to litigate it for the next 4, 5 or 6, 7 years, whatever that time frame is. You will not be able to take the credit. You will be in a limbo whether you should account for it. How should you account for it? Now, after 6, 7 years or 8 years, 10 years, when the ruling will eventually come, suppose it comes in your favor, then it in itself would be a challenge. Now, how to take the credit of that? What to do with that? It might, I heard one of the panelists in couple of last sessions which we had, many a times it happens that by the time the ruling comes in or the final verdict comes by Supreme Court, that judgment ends up to be a simple piece of paper. You cannot, you are eventually not really benefited out of that. So to all my friends, colleagues, read the law. Case law will only kind of supplement the law which has been kind of laid down. And it is very essential to go to the experts to get a better understanding of law rather than going to the advanced rule. Again, that is my personal opinion, not to be quoted anywhere. Thank you.
No, so you rightly pointed out, and it's not that such advanced rulings are binding on the taxpayers who are taking that. They also carry persuasive value for other taxpayers. So to that extent also, they should be mindful of what questions they are taking up before advanced ruling. If the law is simple and clear and they get a negative advanced ruling on that, then it creates a whole lot of confusion for the industry. So
you rightly mentioned. Now, suppose a adverse ruling comes from Gujarat AR. Now, when I approach to my officer, now see, it is easy to do a thing rather than to repair a thing, right? So it is always easy to explain the law to a person. But if he has a precedent, for example, your officer has that negative ruling in his mind. So first you will have to undo or put that why this advance ruling is wrong and what is the correct position of law. And everyone on this panel or all our viewers must be well aware of that once a thing gets into the mind of an officer, he will simply copy paste it. You may bring him the high court ruling, which might support your case, but if he has one negative advance ruling, he will place reliance on that to safeguard the interest of the government. And then the litigation starts. So a bad advance ruling not only creates problem for the person who has taken it, but for the entire fraternity. So it would be very advantageous for the industry as a whole that we take a cautious approach while approaching to the advance rulings. Thank you.
All our viewers have a food for thought after your strong words now before going to the advanced ruling authority.
So if I summarize all the discussions today, I think all our panelists want that there should not be any cascading effect of taxes. So every expense, every amount incurred should be eligible for credit. And secondly, the whole mechanism of taking credit, be it compliances, matching, etc., should be simplified. So with this, we come to the end of the session, and we are indeed grateful to all the panelists for sparing their time and sharing their thoughts. This was one of the most important sessions we had because everyone is concerned with ITC as to how much they can maximize. So thank you, Pawan, Shailendra, Milind, and Sandeep for sparing your time and sharing both your legal and practical thoughts with our participants.